There are no official records of her birth. No ledger marks the day she arrived. No church book carries her name. If she was given one, it disappeared quickly. On paper, she does not exist. And yet, the people who lived near the river remembered her for decades afterward, long after the plantation itself collapsed into weeds and red clay. They remembered her not by name, but by silence. In the counties along the Oconee, there was an understanding older than most families. Some stories were not told in full. They were hinted at, broken into fragments, lowered into quiet. Men would pause mid-sentence and change direction. Women would look down at their hands and press their lips together. When asked why, they gave careful answers. It wasn't decent. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't true. But fear has a way of preserving things that ink never does. The plantation where it happened stood on high ground, visible from the road through a long corridor of oak trees. Travelers noticed it because it was larger than most and quieter than it should have been. Even during harvest, when other estates rang with shouting and movement, this one felt restrained, as if holding its breath. Before everything changed, there was nothing remarkable about it. It was ordinary. Ordinary in the way plantations were always ordinary. The violence was not dramatic. It was scheduled. Men believed themselves lawful. Nothing about it felt worth recording. She arrived young. How young depends on who was asked. Some said barely grown. Others said already hardened by work elsewhere. What everyone agreed on was this: she was not bought for the fields. She was brought into the house. House servants lived closer to the masters. Cleaner floors, quieter suffering. From the beginning, she was noticed. Not for beauty, for stillness. She worked without warmth, listened without softness, moved without apology. This was not read as dignity. It was read as insolence. They corrected insolence quickly. Punishment did not always involve blood. Sometimes it was repetition. Sometimes sleep was taken instead. What no one noticed was that silence did not protect her. It taught her something else. And that lesson would not fade. If she ever had a name before arriving there, it did not survive her. Names were currency. They were shortened, reassigned, or taken away. On that plantation, she was referred to by function more than identity. The girl from the house, the one from the kitchen, most often, just her. She learned how to occupy space without claiming it, how to stand close enough to hear instructions, but far enough to avoid attention. She moved carefully, not because she was clumsy, but because bodies like hers were punished for being noticed. Each morning began before the light reached the ground. She woke without bells, without sound. Sleep never settled deeply. She learned to rest lightly, ready to wake at the smallest change. Inside the house, cruelty behaved differently. It was quieter, measured, disguised as order. She carried water, scrubbed surfaces already clean, prepared meals she would never taste. When spoken to, she answered. When ignored, she disappeared. What separated her from the others was not defiance. It was observation. She watched everything. She learned patterns. Which floorboard creaked, which door stuck when the air grew heavy, which men drank longer in the evening. The first time she was summoned alone, she understood immediately why. There was no shouting, no struggle worth recording. When it was over, he returned to his work. She remained where she stood for several seconds longer. Not frozen, just understanding. After that, there were others. Some hurried, some were rough, some attempted kindness afterward. Punishments followed, never explained honestly, always justified. Other women noticed. They did not speak. Silence was not betrayal. It was survival. Still, small gestures appeared. An extra cloth. Food placed carefully at the edge of a bowl. She accepted these without comment. As months passed, something hardened inside her. Not rage, not hatred. Clarity. She stopped seeking approval, stopped anticipating mercy. And the men noticed. They could not tell what she was thinking. That frightened them. Violence rarely announces itself. It accumulates. Days followed rigid patterns that created the illusion of stability. Bells rang. Orders were obeyed. From a distance, everything appeared controlled. But repetition became pressure. What had happened before was expected to happen again. The men believed access was permanent, guaranteed by law, protected by silence. That belief made them careless. Doors closed less carefully. Voices lowered less often. Hands lingered openly. She noticed every mistake. At night, while others slept heavily, she reviewed the day. Not emotionally, mechanically. Who was where? Which paths emptied first? Which sounds carried farthest? She learned that men trusted darkness too much, and darkness punished that trust. She tested boundaries carefully, arriving moments late, pausing at thresholds, standing just far enough away to force movement. Each reaction taught her something. Punishment followed. She absorbed it without protest. Fear changed shape inside her. It became focused. The first death was not planned as a beginning. It was a correction. The explanation came quickly. An accident. A fall. Everyone accepted it, because acceptance was easier. She watched closely. The lack of investigation confirmed what she already knew. The system cared more about order than truth. By the second death, intention entered. By the third, fear moved openly through the house. Locks were checked, paths avoided. Still, no one named her. They could not imagine her as the source. That was their mistake. By the fourth, the plantation could no longer pretend. And she was already gone. There is no written account of that night, only reconstruction, built from what failed to have an afterward. The evening began without distinction. Supper was served. Lamps were lit. Voices carried through the house. She moved through her tasks without deviation. Those who saw her later said nothing felt different. That was intentional. The man who followed her believed himself unseen. Repetition taught him certainty. He did not consider that repetition works both ways. The space was narrow, functional, unremarkable. That mattered. Places like that are neglected because nothing important is expected to happen there. When he reached for her, she did not pull away immediately. That pause mattered. What followed was fast, controlled. There was no shouting, no sound that carried beyond the walls. When she stepped back, he did not follow. She did not linger. She returned what needed returning, wiped what needed wiping. By morning, explanations failed. This death could not be contained. Decisions were made quietly. The house would close. Records would adjust. Labor would be reassigned. She was not hunted. To hunt would have required naming her. And naming her meant admitting fear. So the system chose erasure and carried the fear forward instead. The land outlived everyone involved. New families arrived. Names changed. Roads shifted. The plantation softened into ruin. But memory remained. Older residents avoided the area without quite knowing why. Children were redirected. Paths went unused. When asked, answers stayed vague. Bad land. Unlucky ground. People used to disappear. No one spoke her name. Not because it was unknown, but because a warning does not need a face. Fear works best when it stays indistinct. Occasionally, someone noticed missing records. Questions were asked, politely. They led nowhere.
To reconstruct her story required imagining her as human. That imagination was rare. What survived instead were fragments. A room no one slept in. A path no one chose. The knowledge that control is never absolute. That silence is not consent. No monument was raised. No apology written. But the plantation never recovered its confidence. That was her legacy. Not violence, not blood. Disruption. Some histories are too dangerous to celebrate, too revealing.